Hi and welcome to another Alpha Challenge video. In this video I'll be breaking down a new archetype from the Into the Emerald Dream. The card Hamul Rune Totem allows you to imbue your hero power, which means that it ends up changing for different classes, but for Druid it changes to summon a 1/1 Jade Golem sort of style card. And when you use it, each time you imbue your hero power, you end up getting it to get it bigger and bigger, so it becomes a 1/1, 2/2, 3/3, 4/4, etc. There are a few cards in the deck that are used specifically to imbue the hero power. And then after that, there's also every single time you play a nature spell, it also buffs the hero power as well. When you use your hero power, you want to make sure that it's generally a larger minion, like 4/4 at least, especially in this sort of metagame that's here, because if you don't get the value coming from it, it means that you essentially are sort of wasting your mana that's there. And then there's also other cards in the deck, like there's other nature spells in the deck that you'll be using to deal with your opponent, to make sure that they're not able to build their board and things like that. There's a lot of buffs that comes from it. The cards you want to mulligan for is Living Roots, Bitterbloom Knight, Reforestation, Horn of Plenty, and the 5-mana Grove Shaper, because each of these cards are very important for your win condition. In particular, on turn 1 you want to be playing down your Living Roots. For your turn 5, or a little bit afterwards, you want to be getting your Groove Shaper out, because the Groove Shaper ends up summoning 2/2s onto your board. That means you can reuse the spells. A little interesting combination that I've found with it so far is using the Lesser Spellstone Totem, the Lesser Spellstone card, to hit into your 2/2, because you can use it over and over to be able to get the buffs happening. So if you have 2 of those sorts of cards in your hand, you can use those. In addition, if you use Innovate, you can also make sure that you can use that too. So going into the game, I am playing against a Priest, and they're also using the Imbue hero power, but their one makes it so they can choose either a Priest spell or a Priest minion, and it's relatively decent. Like, each of the different hero powers that come from it, it means that hero powers actually have some sort of real value to them again, because for the last even the last year or so that I've started playing again, hero powers haven't been very useful. Like, you use it just on the off chance that you don't have much mana or things like to do. For the most part, you don't really use them too much. You'll just use them every so often. But then with this these new hero powers that are coming in, it makes it somewhat interesting for what you can do and what you can do with those sorts of cards. You'll notice that I just use my hero power then. Getting the 7/7 down onto the board on turn 6 is pretty good, and at that sort of amount, now I am probably just going to be hitting the hero power every single turn to make sure that I am getting each of those minions out onto the board. They ended up trading their 3/6 into me, which is fine. Like, it means that I can't just easily trade with it. I just hovered over Reforestation. It's important, especially if you have that to keep that in your opening hand, because getting the extra buff coming from it means that you can get the extra spell or extra minion out of your deck, which is in general going to be quite important. The other thing that's also pretty cool about it is that when you use your Reforestation, especially with Groove Shaper, if you have it as the buffed version, when you get it back into your hand with the minion that dies, you'll get that back in your hand again. Going into the next game, I am playing against a Death Knight. So Death Knight is generally playing the Leech version, which is relatively strong, and I did notice and get a comment that talked about how Soulsteal is not going to be in the new expansion, which will be very bad for it, because Soulstealer, I've noticed, is a pretty important card for that particular deck, just because you can get the extra board clear. It means that you can fatigue them, or push them out a bit longer and out mana them. I did just use the Living Roots on one. Getting the 2/1/1s down into the board is quite useful. It also means that every second, so it's one of the nature spells, and the second nature spell also will get you that buff as well. I did just use the hero power then because I don't have anything in my hand. If I had another nature spell besides from Reforestation, I'd consider using that obviously, but with Reforestation I don't really want to use it like that. I do end up just using the Innovate to be able to get the 4/4 out onto the board, because I am going to need to start pressuring. It also means that I don't float my mana, because next turn I'll be able to use the Reforestation plus my hero power. They only have the 2/2 down on the board as well, so I'm not really too concerned about that. They use their Ghoul to be able to charge into my 4/4, and then they end up trading their Chillforge Baron into me as well. I obviously do have a pretty decent board to be dealing with them too, so I'm not really too concerned with what they're doing. Their Leeches would be able to take out a bunch of my minions if they did end up getting Leeches down onto the board. Next turn I'm more than likely just going to be using Reforestation into hero power. It means I'll get a 3/3 out onto the board as well. But with the draw, it ends up being the minion, the 2/3 minion, to get the bigger buff onto my Golem, just because I obviously want to be making sure that I'm getting most value from my hero power, and getting the extra immune on it is going to be decent. It means that if my photosynthesis is useful and I can get another spell or something from it, it means that I have that option rather than by already having that minion out onto the board. So I trade the 2/3s here. I keep the Leech alive because I will be able to use the Spell Stone if I need to. I end up using the Choose One card, which is another card that you potentially could keep in your mulligan, but I've noticed that it's not that important for your particular plays. I do have the Lesser Spell Stone here, so I use that, and then I end up using my hero power just to get the extra minion down onto the board. I'm keeping the spell just in case I need to use it to do some sort of clear. You'll notice also that I do have the Hamol in my hand. That card is absolutely useless. If you draw into it, it's very similar to Patches. Just a 5/6 body onto the board isn't going to be very useful for you. So it will be a card that you definitely want to avoid in your mulligan. The importance obviously behind it is that you do get the extra the extra imbues coming from each of your nature spells. So I use the Wrath Eater, and then I use my hero power to just establish more of a board. Getting the bigger and bigger men is going to be quite important to make sure that you make sure that I am going to be able to take them out quite easily. And in general, they're not really going to have too much to be able to deal with my sort of board anyway. And with the minions that are on board, I do have the 13 damage for lethal, and then obviously they end up conceding. So yeah, it's relatively decent sort of archetype. I'm playing against a warrior now. I'm two wins, 2 losses, so it was a little bit disappointing with how I was going in this sort of one. I was playing okay. Like, I don't feel like I played poorly in any of the games, but with these sorts of tavern brawls, you'll notice that it ends up being somewhat similar to Arena, because it gives you, like, each of your plays you're wanting to do on curve especially, and you're wanting to do tempo plays. You'll try out value your opponent as well. Those is generally going to be the best sort of styles of decks. In this hand, I did keep the Groove Shaper, the Wrath, and the Reforestation. Reforestation's always a keep. I kept the Wrath because with the warrior that's being played, it's the Draenei, and that means that it's going to be able to get quite aggressive onto you. So I do need to make sure that I am holding out for that. I drew onto my Bitterbloom Knight, so I am just going to play that straight down onto the board. It's generally going to be one of your better 2-drop minions or 2-drop plays to do. And then they end up just getting their spell through the Astrobiologist. They play down their Stranded Spaceman, so that means that the next minion's going to get Rush. So that's something that I do need to think about when I am doing my next turn. I end up drawing Horn of Plenty, which is quite a good spell. Being able to get the reduction down of 2 mana is always going to be quite strong. I chose the Reforestation here just because it is in general going to be the best card, but I'll be able to use it on the same turn as Groove Shaper gets played down a lot easier, since it's going to be 0 mana with the Horn of Plenty with the Horn of Plenty going onto it. They end up playing down the Astrobiologist. It gets the rush onto it, so they are going to be able to trade into my 2-1. I'm not really too concerned since they aren't really posing too much pressure at the moment. I do have a bunch of clears in my hand as well that I can use. I have the Wrath, I have the Lesser Spellstone. I'm going to use the Reforestation now to get some extra cards. I did draw into my second Groove Shaper as well, which is fine. And then I use the Solar Wrath on the 2-3 just to get an extra spell down onto the board, but it also means they're not pushing as much damage onto me. They end up getting another card coming from their Astrobiologist, and then they play down this Vindicator, which I don't think I'd ever seen before, but basically it means that your hero gets the same attack as the minion that you play down. I do end up just using the Groove Shaper here. It ends up getting Innovate, which is really strong and was a really good pull for me. I do send it onto the 2-2, but yeah, and then I obviously get the extra one coming out as well. An interesting play that you can do with the Groove Shapers is you can use the Innovate or the Lesser Spellstones to go onto them and just repeat it over and over if they don't have a board. But it also is a way that you can get more of those particular minions out as well, and then you can get the hero power to become bigger and bigger through that, so you could potentially use it on a later turn to be able to get a stronger Groove Shaper. They end up summoning another 2-5, which is fine, like it's not really too threatening towards me anyway. They've done most of their trades, but also it ended up using that buff that was coming from their big drop last turn, so they only got an extra 2 attack, which I'm perfectly fine with. I do have the Lesser Spellstone on this 2-2 as well, which is good for me. I use the Innovate here, it gets me the extra buff coming out, and then I use the Lesser Spellstones on both of the, on the 2-3 twice to get me more of my little minions out onto the board. I'm definitely glad that there's not really, it doesn't seem like there's any sort of really big minion buff in this sort of expansion, like the old token druids that used to be around. Because those decks with this would be very, very frustrating to be dealing with. They end up playing their Great Mace down, which is fine, like it means that they're going to get some buffs into their hand, but it is definitely a lot later than what they'd want it. And then they use Champions of Azeroth. That probably wasn't a great play for them. They really need to get something down onto the board, especially since I am applying so much pressure towards them. My Groove Shaper, without it being cleared, means that I can have a lot of value coming from it. I do obviously have the 2 Lesser Spellstones in my hand, so I could have potentially, if I wanted to, just infinite looped it to be able to get more and more buffs down onto my minions. But I end up just getting the 8-8 down on the board. Obviously that's applying a bit more pressure for me, and having the Divine Shield on the board as well also means that there's not really too much they're going to be able to do. Yeah, so like if they got a rush, it means they wouldn't be able to take out my 8-8, so I'll still be able to push quite a lot of damage going into the next turn. You'll notice that I also have the 4-drop Legendary in this deck, so if you get it with the Dark Gift onto your Groove Shaper that gives -2 attack and -2 cost, it's definitely one of the strongest of the particular things to be using. I trade my Tree of Life in here because I will be able to use my Lesser Spellstones to go onto it as well. I do play down the Mark of the Wild onto my 2-2. Obviously I can get the next Innovate coming from it as well. And then I end up using the Wrath onto the 11-3. And it obviously ends up clearing that minion that's there as well. With this amount of mana that I have here, I could have used the combo for the Lesser Spellstones plus the minion. I did end up making a misplay here because I did play down the 2-2 rather than get the extra minion buff down onto the board. I popped the Innovate, and then I think I used the Mark of the Wild here as well. Oh, sorry, the Living Roots as well to get the finish of them. Yeah, so like, it definitely does have some strong power to it. I remembered what happened in that previous game. So the second game that I lost against a Druid who got a Final Frontier, and the Final Frontier got the got one of the legendaries that has the 2 hands, a Colossal, I think it was, and it has Wind Fury for both of its hands and its hero, and then they ended up getting that down quite early, and it just was not very fun for me. Yeah. So, this game is against a Paladin, so they'll more than likely be playing the Libram Paladin that you'll, Libram Paladin that you'll find. They use the Aegis of Light. It does mean that they've changed their hero power across now as well. I just play down my Bitterbloom Knight. Next turn I'll be playing down the other Bitterbloom Knight, and turn 4 I'll be playing down one of my 2 4-drops. Generally it's a good idea to make sure you think about your curve before or while you're preparing for your turns. I do end up drawing Mark of the Wild, which means that I could have used it to trade if I wanted to, but in general it's just better getting the extra 2-3 down onto the board. Like I could have used the 2-3 from the Mark of the Wild, but it doesn't really matter too much for me. They're going to use their 2-3 to trade into my 2-2, obviously, because that means that they trade quite efficiently and quite well into it. And they also do get the extra Libram spell coming from their deck using their spell burst. The only way that would have been an issue and would have got punished from it is that if they had used the Libram and not gotten the spell coming out with the coin, that's a way that it could have been punished by not having the extra extra Mark of the Wild onto my minion. They end up using the Maul, which means that they are getting they're more than likely going to get the Rush of the 3/3s Libram out of their deck, the 6 mana one. It's not really too much of a concern for me because they haven't got the reduction down on it yet. I end up using the Horn here. I choose Reforestation. I play down the Living Roots, and then I tap my hero power because it is now going to be summoning a 5/5, which is relatively decent going into turn 5, especially in this sort of metagame that we have here. They end up getting one of their dragon spells coming from their deck, and then they play down their Guardian, so in general it's just going to be trading a 1/1 into them and then the 5/5. So they hit me with the 4. That's a really bad swing. Like it's not great because I am just always going to be. I can always just swing the 5-drop into the 4/4. Yeah, that wasn't a great play from them, because if you are doing that sort of play, you generally want to make sure that you're not going to be taking such a reduction. You'll notice that I did get the Groove Shaper then, and it has the reduction of the 2 health and also the reduction cost down to 3. So next turn I do have a lot of value that I'll be able to use just simply because of that. They end up playing down their Libram that reduces down, their minion that reduces down the Libram cost. And it's fine, like it's not really too much of a problem for me. I am going to use my Groove Shaper here to get an extra card out of my deck. Get the extra 2/2 down onto the board. I then also get the Mortal Swarm out as well. I use the Mark of the Wild down onto the 2/2. It just gets the extra value that can come from it as well. And it gets the extra minion down too. I end up using the 5/5 to trade into the 4/2, and then I send the damage into the 4/2 as well. I don't want them to have the ability to use a Divine Shield plus their buff, because if they did have the buff and then gave the 3 to it, it could be a potential issue for me. So it's important, if you are doing those sorts of trades, that you're making sure that you value if your opponent's going to use the buff or not. If they do have a buff that could potentially go onto their minion to make it so it's a really strong trade for them, you want to make sure that you're playing around that, which is the reason why I did in that particular way. They did use that, like, you'll notice also that they just did another trade that was a little bit interesting by trading into the 4/4 with their 1/1. Like, I know the idea behind it was to get the extra, it mean that I couldn't just ridiculously efficiently trade into them, but with the 2/2s and things like that on the board anyway, I don't really care. Like, it's not really an issue for me. I am just counting up right now to see if I've got enough damage, which I don't just yet since they do have the 20 health. But with my board that I have here, I am in general just going to win relatively soon. There isn't really too much that they're posing. I played on the Mark of the Wild onto onto the Grove, which is fine, but I would have preferred playing it on a different card. Like, I really should have been paying attention to make sure that it was going onto another minion, especially since they could potentially clear it if they had some sort of rush plus buff. They end up using one of their spells coming from the 9/7. I am just right now counting to make sure I do have lethal. With the Mark of the Wild, I do end up having it plus the Feral Rage. Obviously, when you are doing trades and you're playing, make sure that you check for lethal each time, especially if you definitely are close. Because if I had traded into that 9/7, then obviously I wouldn't have had such an easy chance, or potentially may not have had lethal at all. Going into this game, I am playing against another Druid, so with the Tavern Brawl, how it is, you'll be playing against the Imbue Druid. It seems relatively decent. Like, I don't know if it's going to be that strong going into the metagame, especially since of how tempo based it is. And without having the nature spells, or with only having nature spells, you can't use things like Wild Growth or you can't use things such as New Heights, which is in general going to be one of the best of the Druid spells anyway. Because like being able to ramp obviously is going to be quite important. I do have the actually I'm not too sure I'll have to check if Wild Growth is a nature spell, like it might be, but even still, not having New Heights is a pretty big disappointment for it. I do end up drawing the Groove Shaper here, which is going to be quite strong for me going into turn 5 or 6 or 7. It just depends on how my mana ends up going for it. I end up just using the choose one spell. I choose the Twilight of Influence because that's going to be the strongest one that I can use, especially against their Groove Shaper if they end up playing it down, because you can use that spell to just be able to take it out completely, because it's essentially a power corrupt Shadow Word Pain. They end up playing down a 4/5 that's the dragon. I don't have any reason to trade here, which is the reason why I kept the two 2/2s on the board, and it obviously especially ended up benefiting me since I did get the 2/2 that I can use to trade into the 4/4 Divine Shield. There wasn't really any point in trading in that situation, which is the reason why I kept it. I play down the Disciple here, it gets me the free hero power, and then I use my 2/2 to trade into the 4/4, and I just keep that dragon down on the board. If they trade into me, or if they get the Death Rattle off, I want to be taking my time with that coming out, because it means that it's less likely the longer this game goes on that they won't get the dragon off. Like, it reduces down the likelihood if they don't have it for an extra turn or two. So just having a 4/5 with Taunt on the board isn't really doing anything for them. But obviously, if they end up getting into their deck and then get the extra value from it, that's where the extra issue comes from it. So they ended up trading into my 4/4, which did get the 2-for-1, just because I was able to use my other card that came from it too. I do have the 4/4. They do have their own 4/4 down on the board. I trade my 3/3 and 2/2 into it. It isn't an exceptional trade, but since it meant that I could use my hero power, it means that I come ahead a little bit, especially with having a little bit of a stronger board that's there as well. They end up using the choose one spell that they end up getting. It means they're just trading into my Groove Shaper and they used all their mana on that. So I am definitely coming ahead quite a lot with that play that they had. I used the 2/2 just to trade into the minion, and then I used my Spellstone that came from it as well. I used the Horn of Plenty to get another spell out. I choose the Living Roots because it is going to in general get the best value coming from it, and I just end up using the Living Roots because I do have the Imbue coming next, the extra buff coming next to change from a 6/6 into a 7/7. And having the 7/7 down on the board, especially since they haven't really done too much, does make it quite strong for me. With the 6/6, there isn't really too much difference that could come from it, but having the 7/7 rather than the 6/6 means they couldn't use something like a Wrath or a Wrath drawing a card. I use the Reforestation here. It gets me obviously some extra cards out of my deck. I play down the Divine Shield minion, gets me the extra buff onto my minion, and then I get the 8/8 down on the board. With the current hand and board state that I have at the moment, I do have lethal next turn, which is good for me. It's likely they're not going to end up being able to get any particular play that can go into me, that can easily clear my board without me having a significant advantage. They end up playing down Spirits of the Forest, so it does get them some taunts down the board. It allows them to stall a little bit longer. I could have in this situation used the 2 mana spell to be able to clear it, but it doesn't really matter too much. I use the Horn of Plenty here. It gets me the extra card out of my deck. I just choose the Reforestation, and then I use it to get a spell. It does get me another Horn of Plenty, so I'm just gonna but I end up using the Spellstones to be able to just clear a bit better with them. It also means that I can get the extra buff minion out of my deck as well. The next turn they potentially will have the Melorone? The card that if you've imbued for 4 times you can get the Wild God out of your deck for 1. And those cards are relatively decent. There definitely is better ones than, like, some aren't that great. The one attack 30 that they ended up getting down on the board with it having elusive is a little bit annoying. The best way to trade into this is you want to trade with your bigger minions first, generally. I do end up using the Horn of Plenty here. I get to choose 1 spell because I know there's a rogue one that you can get, and I ended up finding it with the Barbed Thorn, so I just choose that. I put it down, get the Poisonous, and then I just spin to the 130 and go face. If I didn't have that, I still had a very strong board, so it doesn't really matter too much for them if they had that or not. Because in reality, I'd have an extra big guy down on the board as well. But yeah, like it seems strong, that card, but you need to have it on curve. Otherwise, it's not going to be that great. Like, if you have it too early as well, it's just a dead card in your hand. In this opening hand, I end up just keeping the Groove Shaper. If I am able to get this off with a strong board, like a strong hand, it can get a strong board, especially if it's not able to be taken out that turn. So you in general want to make sure that you are getting establishing a board to have around it, because if you have the relatively decent board, you will be perfectly fine. I see that they're playing an Elven Minstrel, so I don't know how this person has 5 wins. Yeah, I was a bit confused when they did play that down, because Elven Minstrel definitely isn't a card that you'll usually see with decks that are doing that well, but maybe it's potential that I am playing someone that doesn't have as many wins as me. They've just got as many losses. Yeah, so I get 2 Feral Rages and a Living Roots, which means that I am going to have quite a decent hand, quite a decent amount of burst if I need it. I end up drawing the Flutterwing Guardian, so I just play it down, gets me the extra buff onto my hero power. You'll notice that I haven't used the hero power. I've used it once, but I haven't used it. Well, I didn't use it that turn or other turns, because it's, in general, you want to use it in addition to other things that you're using, rather than just playing it for itself. If it's strong enough, you can, but in general, it's not going to be strong enough until it's at the sort of 4/4, 5/5 sort of stat line. You want to be getting some good buff coming from it. They end up just giving a buff to their charge minion, so it was a little bit frustrating that they did that, but drawing into my Innovate plus the Spellstone means that I am going to be able to clear most of the board. It also means that it's quite unlikely they won't be able to take out the 3/6. With my current hand, I do have quite a strong chance of going quite aggressive with my 2/2s onto the board. They end up playing the Psalm down. It ends up hitting into my Groove Shape, which is a little bit annoying. And then they just play down their Mosquito. So with that, it means that I am sitting in a relatively decent position going into the next turn. I do use the Reforestation here. It gets me an Innovate, which is probably the best card that you can get. I then obviously get the extra buff coming from it. I use my 2/2 to trade, my 2/2s to trade into it. It means that it gets them down onto the board. They end up hitting another of my minions. I use the Innovate, I use the Reforestation, I use Spellstones. I have a bunch of cards that I can use here that is just going to put me at such a significant advantage that they're just going to concede, because they're playing a deck that uses a lot of buffs and things like that. And yeah, like it is quite strong, especially if they don't take out the Groove Shaper that turn. But yeah, that's 6 wins. So if you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and bye for now.